He wasn't born into greatness. He was born and then given away. A young boy, adopted by a middle-class couple in California. No riches, no status, just love and a second chance at life. But what if your very beginning feels like abandonment? What if the world rejects you before it even knows you? Steve Jobs didn't grow up with privileges. While other kids played in big houses, he sat in his father's garage, watching him fix old electronics. That garage would one day become the birthplace of a global revolution. But back then, it was just a place where a quiet kid asked one question. Why? Why do machines work like this? Why does the world settle for less? Why can't we change everything? What happens when a curious mind refuses to stay silent? At school, he was a misfit, not because he was weak, but because he thought differently. Teachers called him disruptive. Friends thought he was strange. But behind those eyes was fire. A fire that didn't want marks. It wanted meaning. So he dropped out of college. He left everything safe behind. No degree, no plan. Just a belief that something big was waiting. Who drops out of college with no backup and still wins? While his friends were applying for jobs, Steve was reading books on Zen Buddhism, walking barefoot, fasting for days, and experimenting with LSD, not for fun, but for vision. He wanted to see what others were blind to. And then he met someone who spoke the same language, Steve Wozniak, a tech genius, an introvert. Together, they started building something in that same garage, something the world had never seen before. Two rebels, one garage. Could they actually change the future? They called it Apple, a simple name. But the mission? Complex. They didn't want to make computers. They wanted to make computers beautiful. They wanted to bring technology to your hands, not just your desks. They wanted machines to feel human. While IBM was building machines for corporations, Apple was building magic for people. And slowly, something impossible started happening. The company grew. The product spread. The world noticed. A dropout and a geek were now running one of the most exciting startups in America. But deep down, Steve still remembered one thing. He was the unwanted child. And maybe that's why he worked twice as hard to prove that he belonged. What does a rejected soul do when the world finally starts clapping? He doesn't smile. He doesn't rest. He builds something so big that even those who left him behind can't ignore it anymore. He built the company from nothing, from garage to greatness. He gave the world a taste of innovation no one had seen before. Apple wasn't just a tech company now. It was a symbol of rebellion, creativity, and boldness. And at the center of it all stood Steve Jobs, charismatic, demanding, brilliant. But sometimes, brilliance blinds. What happens when your own creation starts turning against you? Steve wasn't easy to work with. His expectations were brutal. He wanted perfection, not 99%, but 1,000%. He pushed people to their limits, screamed in boardrooms, challenged every decision. For him, good enough was an insult. But slowly, that fire began to burn too bright, and the very people he hired started feeling threatened. Can the same passion that builds empires also destroy them? In 1985, the unthinkable happened. Apple's board of directors, the men who once believed in his genius, voted against him. They stripped him of power, took away control. And just like that, Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. Imagine being kicked out of the house you built with your own hands. The media mocked him. Investors moved on. Employees whispered, "The legend is over." How does it feel when the world stops calling you a genius and starts calling you a failure? But legends don't vanish, they reload. Steve disappeared from the spotlight, but not from the fight. He started NXT, a computer company so ahead of its time, even Apple couldn't compete. He invested in a small animation studio, one nobody believed in, and renamed it Pixar. People said, "Animation? Really?" He smiled and kept working. What if losing everything gives you a chance to build something even greater? While Apple struggled without him, Steve was learning, growing, evolving. He learned leadership, he learned humility, and most importantly, he learned patience. Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated film. It changed animation forever. Next built powerful software that quietly revolutionized development tools. And then, in 1996, destiny made its move. Apple was dying. Sales were crashing. Competitors were dominating. They needed a savior. They needed the man they had once thrown away. Apple bought Next for its software, but really, they were buying Steve Jobs back. What does it say about a man when even the empire that betrayed him begs for his return? He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't come back for revenge. He came back with vision, to rebuild Apple, to reshape the future. And this time, he wasn't going to settle for just saving the company. He was going to reinvent everything. What if your greatest masterpiece hasn't even started yet? Apple was dying. Its products were failing, stock was crashing, and people had already written the obituary. But then, he came back. Steve Jobs. The man they once removed was now the only hope they had left. He didn't come back for applause. He came back for war, not with competitors, but with mediocrity. His first mission? Simplicity. He killed dozens of projects, cleaned the mess, and focused on one thing: innovation with soul. Apple released the iMac, then the iPod. Slowly, the brand was breathing again. But Steve wasn't satisfied, because in his mind, the real revolution had not yet begun. What if you were holding an idea so powerful it could reshape how the world connects? Behind locked doors and secret meetings, Steve was working on something bold, a device that would kill 3 machines at once: a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator. But more than that, he was working on a new kind of experience, a pocket-sized universe. One device, one touch, one future. His team doubted it. The board feared it. Engineers thought it was impossible, but Steve believed. He obsessed over the design, the interface, the feel. Every curve mattered. Every pixel counted. He wasn't just building a phone. He was sculpting the future of communication. Can a single device change how 8 billion people live their lives? The 9th of January, 2007, San Francisco. Steve walked on stage in a black turtleneck and blue jeans. Calm, confident, deadly focused. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness history. He stood there, paused, and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The room fell silent. Then came the first look at the iPhone, a full touchscreen. No buttons, internet, music, maps, emails, all in one device. It wasn't just a product. It was a prophecy. What do you call a moment when the future arrives early? The world exploded. Lines formed outside stores. People cried while unboxing. Competitors panicked. Industries collapsed. From taxis to cameras, from music players to maps, everything began to fit into a 5-inch screen. But what people didn't see was the man behind the glass. A rebel, a dreamer, a misfit. The adopted kid who was once unwanted now created the most desired object on Earth. What if your pain was preparing you to build what the world didn't know it needed? Steve Jobs didn't just change tech. He changed behavior, culture, business, emotion. He showed us that design isn't decoration, it's human connection. That a phone isn't a tool, it's a doorway. And that real power doesn't shout, it inspires. So the next time you touch your iPhone, pause. And remember the man who once had nothing, no money, no degree, no seat at the table, yet still carved his name into history with vision, obsession, and pain. Because he didn't just give you a device, he gave you a reminder that one person can change everything. Subscribe now for more stories that move you, push you, and remind you to think different just like Steve did.